"Excuse me," the attendant snapped, loud enough for row 2 to hear. "This isn't your seat." The black woman in 1A didn't move. She set her phone on the armrest, boarding pass tucked beneath it. Calm, composed. From 1B, a white passenger chuckled. Figures. His tone was soaked in condescension, like watching her humiliation was part of his ticket price. "Check your manifest again," she said evenly. The attendant folded her arms. "I did. First class is for paying customers." "I paid," she said, sliding the pass forward. First class glared in bold print, but the captain arrived already biased. "Cooperate, ma'am, or you'll be removed." The smirk in 1B widened. She exhaled slowly, clicking her phone awake. A single message draft waited. "Suspend FY 2025 contracts, pending review." One tap and one door, $2 billion in cargo deals would vanish from the airline's books. Her calm smile unnerved them. "Tell me, how quickly do you think your board responds when their entire budget disappears?" Her name was Danielle Rivers, age 46, CEO of Meridian Global Logistics, a company that didn't just move cargo, it moved the backbone of international trade. Every crate of electronics, every refrigerated shipment of medicine, every ton of freight strapped beneath the passenger decks of this airline's fleet, half of it bore Meridian's contracts. But none of that mattered in the cabin of flight, not to the smirking man in 1B, who leaned back like he'd won something simply by existing. Not to the flight attendant, who folded her arms with the confidence of someone sure authority was on her side. Not even to the captain, who had entered the aisle ready to dismiss her without question. To them, Danielle was just another passenger, another problem to solve, another inconvenience to be removed. She had seen this before in boardrooms and negotiations, in hotels and lobbies where assumptions clung to her like static. Arrogance always made the same mistake. It measured her by skin, by gender, by stereotype. And arrogance always underestimated the quiet authority she carried. The passengers didn't know it, but while they chuckled and filmed, Danielle's phone already had a message drafted to the airline CS: "Suspend FY 2025 contracts, pending review." A single tap and $1.2 billion in freight deals would vanish like mist. But Danielle wasn't reckless. She was patient. She had 12 minutes before the doors sealed. 12 minutes before humiliation flipped into revelation. The smirk in 1B lingered like a stain. The man leaned back in his seat, arms folded, a spectator convinced the show was his to enjoy. Danielle didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the captain, who stood tall in the aisle, posture rigid with authority. "Ma'am," the captain said again, his voice sharp enough to cut glass, "you are delaying this flight. I need you to cooperate and move." Danielle's boarding pass remained flat on the tray table, the black letters shouting "First Class." She tapped it once with her manicured finger. "I am in my assigned seat." The flight attendant bristled, tone clipped. "This seat has been reassigned to accommodate." She gestured vaguely toward the white woman beside the smirking man, who looked away as if innocence could be feigned. Danielle's jaw tightened. "Accommodate who?" The attendant hesitated, then squared her shoulders. "A valued customer." The irony nearly made Danielle laugh. A valued customer. As if her company's $1.2 billion contracts weren't the lifeblood of the very aircraft they stood in. But Danielle didn't laugh. She didn't shout. She simply folded her hands, her calm presence filling the silence louder than any protest could. Around them, the cabin buzzed. A teenager angled her phone, recording. A businessman muttered, "Unbelievable," though no one knew which side he meant. Someone further back coughed, whispering, "She should just move." Danielle felt the weight of every eye, but she had endured weight before, of boardrooms filled with men who doubted her, of negotiations where her authority was mocked before it was respected. This was no different. The captain leaned closer, lowering his voice but not his arrogance. "If you don't move voluntarily, I'll have security remove you." Danielle tilted her head slightly. "You would rather ground a flight than check your own manifest." The words sliced through him. His jaw flexed, but he didn't retreat. "Last chance, ma'am." The smirk in 1B widened, smug satisfaction dripping from his expression. Danielle's hand drifted toward her phone, fingers brushing the glass. A single tap could turn arrogance into panic, but not yet. Timing mattered. Impact mattered. She leaned back, her voice steady. You may think this is about a seat. It isn't. It's about respect. And right now, Captain, you're choosing to gamble with more than you realize. The attendant scoffed. This is ridiculous. Danielle smiled faintly. Yes, it is. A hush fell. Even the engines idling outside seemed to quiet, as if the entire plane waited for the next move. The captain's patience snapped like a brittle thread. He motioned sharply to two attendants. Call security. The words ignited the cabin. Gasps rippled through first class. A woman in 2A whispered. Over a seat? Phones lifted higher, tiny red dots glowing as recordings multiplied. The smirk in 1B widened. He leaned toward his companion and muttered finally. Danielle didn't flinch. Her phone still rested on the tray, the glow of its screen dim but ready. Her thumb hovered inches away, the draft message waiting. Suspend FY 2025 contracts pending review. The attendant disappeared toward the front of the plane. Within minutes, two uniformed security officers boarded, their reflective vests catching the cabin light. One stepped forward, his tone stiff. Ma'am, we've been asked to escort you from this flight. Danielle gestured to the boarding pass. This is my seat. The officer hesitated, eyes flicking from the slip of paper to her face. Something in her calm unsettled him. Captain? The captain's jaw clenched. Remove her. We don't have time for this. Passengers muttered louder. She's paid for that seat. What's wrong with you people? This is discrimination. The whispers were no longer background noise. They were fuel. Danielle exhaled slowly, lifting her phone. The crest of Meridian Global Logistics glowed across the glass. Gasps replaced whispers. Her voice cut through the air like steel. Operations Control. This is Danielle Rivers. Flight 417, tail number Juliet 19. I am invoking Clause 1, effective immediately. Suspend all Meridian freight contracts with this airline pending review. The line clicked, loud enough for the first rows to hear. A voice responded firmly. Copy, Miss Rivers. Freight suspension logged. All associated flights are on ground hold until cleared. The captain's face drained of color. You can't. Ops Control interrupted, voice sharp. Captain, stand down. Do not depart until this matter is resolved. The cabin erupted. Phones filmed furiously. Someone shouted, she owns the airline's cargo. The smirk in 1B faltered, confusion cracking his smug facade. Danielle leaned back, folding her arms. Her calm thundered louder than panic. You wanted me removed? Consider it done. Not just from this seat, from your balance sheet. The officers froze, caught between duty and disbelief. Passengers leaned in, captivated. The cabin buzzed like a hive shaken from its perch. Every passenger leaned in, whispering, filming, some nodding in support, others frozen with unease. The captain's face was flushed red, authority cracking like paint under a storm. This is outrageous, he barked, but his voice no longer carried weight. Ops Control's command had already stripped him of authority. The smirking man in 1B tried to recover his bravado. She's bluffing, he said too loudly, his voice wobbling. Nobody shuts down an airline over a seat. Danielle turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze with steady eyes. Watch me. The man shrank back, his confidence deflating in real time. The officers exchanged glances, unsure. One lowered his voice. Ma'am, what do you want us to do? Danielle folded her hands neatly in her lap. Nothing. You'll wait here until the airline decides how much a seat is worth to them. Spoiler, it won't be worth $1.2 billion. Gasps and murmurs swelled again. A woman further back clapped softly. Good for her, another whispered. Finally, someone standing up, but not everyone agreed. A passenger in 3C groaned. Some of us just want to get to Chicago. Danielle didn't turn. Her voice remained calm. then perhaps you should ask your captain why he chose arrogance over accuracy. The captain snapped. Enough. His voice cracked. I will not be undermined on my aircraft. But undermined he was. Every camera pointed at him, every whisper turned against him, every ounce of control slipping from his hands. Danielle glanced at her watch. 10 minutes until scheduled departure. 10 minutes until the board of directors began receiving real-time alerts about frozen freight accounts. 10 minutes until silence became panic in the airline's headquarters. She picked up her phone again, scrolling to her contact. Her thumb hovered over a name, Meridian General Counsel. The captain's voice faltered. What are you doing? Danielle's smile was small but devastating. Ensuring this airline learns the cost of disrespect. The boy with the phone in row 2 whispered loudly enough for the recording to catch. She's the one who funds their cargo. She could bankrupt them. The smirk in 1B had fully evaporated. He shifted uncomfortably, shrinking into his seat. His earlier arrogance now clung to him like smoke, impossible to shake off. Danielle leaned back, calm as ever. You said this seat wasn't mine. You were right. It's bigger than this seat. It's every seat on every plane you operate. And right now, she tapped the phone. They're all mine to give or take. Silence smothered the cabin. Even the skeptics in the back had nothing left to say. The captain stood frozen in the aisle. Jaw tight, face pale, the intercom's order, ops control demanding he stand down, hung over him like a verdict. For the first time, his authority didn't fill the cabin. It collapsed under the weight of something larger, something none of the passengers fully understood. Danielle shifted slightly, not hurried, not aggressive. She adjusted the cuff of her suit, a gesture so small it looked like habit, but her calm presence pulled every eye. Miss Rivers, one officer stammered, realizing only now her name carried weight. You're with Meridian. She met his gaze. I am Meridian. The whisper rippled through the rows. Someone gasped audibly. A phone tilted closer, capturing every second. The smirking man in 1B blinked rapidly, his earlier confidence dissolving. What does that even mean? She's bluffing. Danielle turned to him, voice level. It means your arrogance just cost this airline $1.2 billion in freight contract. If you think that's a bluff, check tomorrow's market reports. Laughter didn't follow. No smugness, just silence. The kind of silence that weighed heavy with truth. The captain cleared his throat, desperate. You can't just... But Danielle raised her phone again. Her thumb hovered above the screen where the message draft glared. Suspend contracts. Notify board. Captain, she said softly. Do you know how quickly your quarterly forecast collapses when $1.2 billion disappears? Do you know how quickly Wall Street smells blood? The attendants shifted nervously. One tried to speak, faltered, then fell silent. A man in 2C leaned forward. Wait, you actually control their freight? Danielle didn't look at him, but her voice carried 60% of every refrigerated container, every luxury shipment, every high-priority package under your feet. Mine. The murmurs swelled again, no longer mocking but reverent. Passengers weren't watching a conflict anymore. They were watching a revelation. The white woman who had sparked it all, the one who had claimed Danielle's seat, shrunk in her chair. Her earlier smugness vanished. She tugged at her scarf, avoiding eye contact, as though invisibility could erase her role. Danielle exhaled slowly, almost like a sigh. This was never about a seat. It was about respect. And tonight you chose to strip mine away. Now I strip yours. The captain sputtered, but ops control interrupted once more. Captain, step aside. We are escalating this to the executive board. Do not proceed with departure. Danielle leaned back, folding her arms. For the first time since the humiliation began, she smiled. The captain backed away, retreating toward the galley like a man stripped of his uniform. His stripes still clung to his sleeves, but the authority behind them had vanished. The passengers watched in stunned silence, their phones raised like courtroom testimony. Danielle lifted her phone again, scrolling through contacts, until she landed on one, board liaison, Atlantic Air. Her finger hovered but didn't press. She wanted them to sweat first. A passenger whispered, "She's bluffing. She has to be." The teenager filming shook her head. "Nah, you don't bluff with that kind of calm." The smirk in 1B had fully dissolved. He leaned toward the captain's seatmate, whispering harshly. But Danielle's voice cut through. "You want to know why this seat matters?" she asked evenly, looking not at the crew but at the passenger. "Because for some, it isn't about class. It's about entitlement. It's about who you assume belongs here and who doesn't." She paused, letting the words sink in. Every eye locked on her. "And here's what you didn't know. I don't just run Meridian. I sit on Atlantic Air's executive board. I hold shares large enough to vote down budget proposals. I own routes, your routes. The freight under these seats doesn't move without my approval." Gasps scattered like sparks. Phones trembled in stunned hands. Someone in row 3 muttered, "Holy shit." The captain's face blanched, his arrogance unraveling strand by strand. You're lying." Danielle tapped her phone, opening an email app. A draft sat ready. "Suspend freight allocation. Immediate. Notify media." She rotated the screen just enough for the first rows to see. Ops Control's voice returned, this time sharper, more urgent. "Ms. Rivers, please stand by. The executive board is being alerted." The attendants looked at each other, eyes wide, suddenly aware that they hadn't just mishandled a passenger. They had detonated a bomb in their own company. Danielle leaned back, her composure absolute. "You thought you could shrink me to nothing. But I am not nothing. I am the budget you spend. The planes you fly, the balance sheets you boast about." The white woman who had stolen her seat trembled now, her face pale. She whispered, "I didn't know." Danielle finally turned toward her, voice cool. "You didn't care to know." Silence fell heavy again. The teenager filming whispered, "This is going viral." Danielle smiled faintly, eyes calm. "Good. Let them see exactly what arrogance costs." The intercom crackled again, but this time it wasn't Ops Control. A new voice, clipped and formal, filled the cabin. "This is Vice President Lang of Atlantic Air. Miss Rivers, we've been notified of a conflict aboard Flight 417. Please accept our immediate apologies. The captain will be relieved of duty pending review. We ask that you remain on the flight. We value your continued partnership." Gasps swept through the cabin. Passengers gaped at each other. A captain relieved mid-boarding? It was unheard of. Danielle didn't smile, but her eyes sharpened. "It seems respect has finally boarded." The captain froze, color draining from his face. The uniform that had once been his armor now looked flimsy. He opened his mouth, then shut it, realizing anything he said would be immortalized on the dozens of cameras still filming. Without a word, he turned, retreating down the aisle, his footsteps heavy, every eye drilling into his back. The smirking man in 1B shifted uncomfortably, his earlier bravado dissolved. He glanced at Danielle, then away, suddenly fascinated by the stitching on his seatbelt. The white woman who had stolen Danielle's seat whispered weakly, "I'm sorry." Danielle tilted her head. "You're not sorry. You're afraid, and that's the difference." The words cut sharper than any slap. The woman's face crumpled, her arrogance hollowed out in front of strangers and strangers' phones. Ops Control returned, firmer now. "Miss Rivers, your instructions are being implemented. Freight contracts are frozen pending your clearance. Do you wish to proceed with full suspension?" Danielle let the silence stretch, tension thick. She tapped her phone, her thumb hovering over the draft message. Every passenger leaned in. She lowered her voice, but the cabin caught every syllable. "Let this stand as a reminder. You cannot humiliate the hand that feeds you. Not anymore." And with a final deliberate tap, she sent the message. A cascade of alerts pinged instantly across executives' devices. Contracts $1.2 billion worth vanished into limbo. The very lifeblood of the airline was frozen by a woman they had tried to belittle. The teenager filming whispered, "She just shut down the whole company." Danielle folded her hands again, serenity cloaking her. "Correction," she said softly. "I reminded them who really owns the sky." Passengers broke into scattered applause, unsure if they were clapping for her courage, her power, or simply the spectacle of watching arrogance collapse in real time. The attendant who had started it all stood rigid, her face pale, words gone. Danielle finally turned to her. You announced to the cabin that I didn't belong here. I suggest you announce again. Tell them the truth this time. The attendant swallowed, her voice trembling. This is Ms. Danielle Rivers, CEO of Meridian Global Logistics, Atlantic Air's largest corporate partner. Gasps turned into murmurs of awe. Even those who had doubted now leaned forward, their skepticism silenced. Danielle leaned back, eyes closed for the briefest moment. She didn't need their applause. She didn't need validation. She had what mattered. The truth, laid bare in the most public way possible. The engines hummed idle, but the flight wasn't going anywhere. Not yet. Not until the dust settled from the storm Danielle had unleashed. The vice president's voice returned over the intercom, clipped and urgent. Passengers, thank you for your patience. There has been a crew reassignment. Your safety and comfort are our top priority. Comfort. The word rang hollow. Everyone in the cabin knew this wasn't about comfort. It was about survival. Atlantic Air had stumbled headfirst into disaster, and the woman they underestimated now sat at its epicenter. Danielle remained still, her phone resting face up on the tray. Notifications continued to roll in, updates from Meridian's legal team, pings from Atlantic Air's freight department, emails marked urgent. She didn't need to open them yet. She had already set the machine in motion. Across from her, the flight attendant who had first demanded she move now stood stiff, face pale. Her earlier confidence had drained away, leaving only dread. Passengers stared openly, some shaking their heads, others whispering accusation. A man in row 3 said it plainly, "This is discrimination, and we all saw it." The attendant flinched. Danielle finally looked at her, calm but cutting. "Do you understand the cost of your word?" The attendant stammered. I didn't know." Danielle raised her hand, stopping her. "Ignorance isn't defense. Not anymore." The woman dropped her gaze, silent. Security officers, still standing awkwardly in the aisle, received new instructions on their radio. One stepped forward. "Miss Rivers, the captain has been relieved. You may remain on board. Atlantic Air leadership requests a private debrief once you land." Danielle arched a brow. A debrief or an apology? The officer swallowed. Both men. Passengers chuckled softly, tension breaking just enough for Danielle to sense the tide had turned fully. She had gone from target to vindication, and everyone knew it. The smirking man in 1B cleared his throat, finally daring to speak. "Look, I didn't mean anything by it. Just thought." Danielle turned her head slowly, her gaze pinning him in place. "You thought wrong, and your thoughtlessness almost cost this airline its foundation." He shut his mouth, shrinking back into his seat. The white woman who had tried to claim Danielle's seat fidgeted nervously, then whispered, "I'm sorry." Danielle studied her for a long moment. Then she said softly but firmly, "You didn't just insult me. You insulted everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. That won't vanish, because you're uncomfortable now." The woman blinked back tears, silent under the weight of truth. The cabin settled into a heavy quiet. Outside lights blinked on the tarmac, signaling delay. Inside, passengers shifted, unsure what to do with the energy crackling through the air. Danielle leaned back at last, her voice even. "This flight will leave, but not until accountability has boarded first." By the time the plane touched down in Chicago, the news had already beaten them to the ground. Passenger videos, captions screaming CEO freezes $1.2 billion airline contract mid-flight, and hashtags spreading faster than wildfire. Danielle hadn't needed to post a word, others had carried the truth for her. The debrief was no quiet conversation. She was escorted into a glass-walled conference room at the terminal, a dozen Atlantic Air executives waiting with faces pale and drawn. Their voices overlapped at once. "Miss Rivers, please, this was an isolated incident. We'll make it right." Danielle held up a hand. Silence fell like a hammer. "Do you know what arrogance costs?" she asked evenly. "It costs trust, and trust is worth more than contracts. You lost both tonight." The VP of Operations cleared his throat nervously. "We've already suspended the captain. The attendant will be placed under review. We'll issue a public apology immediately. Danielle tilted her head. An apology won't rewrite discrimination. The CFO leaned forward desperately. Miss Rivers, please. Freezing contracts of that scale. It destabilizes not only us but your own shipping schedules. Danielle's smile was faint, deliberate. Meridian has options. Atlantic Air doesn't. The words landed with crushing weight. The executives flinched, their empire suddenly fragile under her calm dismantling. She pulled out her phone, opening the draft email still unsent. Full termination notice. The subject line alone made their throats tighten. I should send this, she said quietly. I should remind every company in this industry that arrogance has consequences. The room went still. But, she continued, lowering the phone, I am also a businesswoman. I deal in correction, not destruction. Relief flickered across their faces, but it was short-lived. Her voice sharpened. Correction looks like this. Public acknowledgement of misconduct. A new equity and respect training initiative for all staff. A written clause in our contracts ensuring immediate penalties for discriminatory behavior. The VP of Operations swallowed hard. Done. And one more thing, Danielle added, eyes steady. I want it on record that the woman you tried to erase tonight owns the skies you fly. The silence was deafening. The CEO of Atlantic Air, who had joined late, finally spoke, his voice strained. You'll have it, on record, in writing. Danielle leaned back, satisfied. Good, then perhaps we can begin to rebuild what you almost destroyed. The executives nodded quickly, their relief palpable. But Danielle knew what lingered beneath it. Not fear of her personally, but of the truth she carried, the truth she had exposed. The press release went out within hours. Headlines across every major outlet carried the same phrasing, Atlantic Air acknowledges discrimination, pledges reforms after incident with Meridian CEO. The words were corporate, polished, but the message was clear. Danielle Rivers had forced an empire to kneel. For passengers, the story had already been cemented in the glow of their screens. Videos flooded social media. Danielle sitting calmly, the captain unraveling, the smug man in 1B shrinking when the truth landed. Clips played on loop with captions like "Don't mess with the real boss" and "She owns the skies." Millions watched, millions cheered. But Danielle hadn't done it for cheers. She had done it for correction. Back at her office, the ripple effects arrived swiftly. Competitor airlines reached out with offers, eager to court Meridian's contracts. Advocacy groups sent statements of solidarity. Her inbox overflowed with strangers thanking her for showing what power looked like when wielded with dignity. The fallout for Atlantic Air was immediate. The captain's suspension became termination. The attendant resigned under scrutiny. Shareholders demanded accountability, forcing the board to adopt Danielle's new clauses in writing. For the first time, respect wasn't just a promise. It was a contractual obligation. Danielle watched it all unfold with quiet steadiness. She didn't gloat. She didn't celebrate. She carried herself the same way she had in that cabin, calm, unshakable, undeniable. Passengers who had been on the flight began giving interviews. One woman said, "I thought she was just another passenger. Then I realized she was the only reason that airline even existed." Another added, her calm scared them more than shouting ever could. The man in 1B never gave a statement. His silence became its own humiliation. His smirk immortalized as the face of arrogance undone. The woman who had stolen Danielle's seat released a short apology online. It was met with ridicule. "Too little, too late," one commenter wrote. Through it all, Danielle returned to work, guiding Meridian's operations as smoothly as she had before. But one thing had changed. The world now saw her not only as a CEO, but as a symbol. When asked by a reporter what lesson she hoped others would take, Danielle answered simply, "Respect is not optional. It is the runway every plane needs to leave the ground." The quote went viral, etched into headlines, repeated in boardrooms and classrooms alike. Mic drop beat, just as hadn't just landed on Flight 477. It had taken off, soaring into a world that would never look at Danielle or the skies she owned the same way again. When the storm passed, silence followed. Not the suffocating silence of humiliation, but the kind that comes when the truth has thundered so loudly there is nothing left to say. Danielle sat in her office days later, the city skyline stretching beyond her windows. Her phone buzzed endlessly, emails from journalists, messages from allies, invitations to panels, yet she ignored most of them. She had already made her statement. Her calm had been broadcast to millions. She didn't need to repeat it, but in the quiet, the weight settled. She replayed the moment the attendant told her to move, the captain's jaw tightening, the smirk in 1B. She remembered the sting of being dismissed, the familiar ache of being told again that she didn't belong. It wasn't the first time. Boardrooms, contracts, dinners, even airports, arrogance had followed her like a shadow, but this time had been different. This time, she had carried the shadow into the light and made the world see it. Still, Danielle wasn't naive. She knew some would twist the story. Already, articles framed it as power flex, as if she had thrown money around for entertainment. They didn't understand. It wasn't about money. It was about dignity, about survival in a world that mistook arrogance for authority. Her sister called one evening, voice thick with pride. "You didn't just stand up for yourself," she said. "You stood up for every person told to shrink, to step aside, to wait their turn." Danielle's throat tightened. She hadn't cried during the confrontation, hadn't cried during the aftermath. But her sister's words cracked something open. For a moment, she let the tears fall, not of grief, but of release. The boy from row 2, the one who had filmed the whole thing, sent her a message through Meridian's office. It was simple. "Thank you. My mom told me she's proud because of you." Danielle read it twice, then pinned it above her desk. She didn't need applause. She didn't need headlines. What she needed, what she had always needed, was proof that her fight meant something beyond contracts and numbers. And here it was, a ripple, reaching someone she would never meet, teaching them they deserved respect too. That was the true aftermath, not the frozen $1.2 billion, not the captain's disgrace. It was the quiet correction of dignity restored, multiplied far beyond the cabin of one delayed flight. The ripple effect reached farther than Danielle expected. Within weeks, major airlines scheduled emergency board meetings. They weren't just worried about Meridian's contracts, they were worried about perception. The phrase "Rivers Clause" began circulating in boardrooms, shorthand for accountability measures that had to be written into agreements before executives dared to exhale. Danielle read the headlines with detached amusement. She hadn't asked for her name to become a clause, but she wasn't surprised. Power leaves fingerprints, and hers were now pressed into the very foundation of the aviation industry. Employees from other companies sent her messages, pilots, attendants, ground crew. Some were furious with their own employers, confessing how discrimination had been brushed aside. Others thanked her, saying her stand had given them leverage to demand change. A cargo handler wrote, "You don't know me, but my daughter will." Because now, when she applies for a job in this industry, she won't face the same walls I did. Danielle saved that email. It mattered more than stock tickers or quarterly gains. But ripples weren't only positive. Critics emerged. Pundits on late-night shows mocked her for weaponizing wealth. Some online voices sneered that she had overreacted, that she should have moved seats for the sake of peace. Danielle didn't respond. Let them sneer. She had learned long ago that arrogance never required proof, only volume. Privately, though, the weight pressed on her. She wondered how many more times she would have to stand firm, how many more times the world would demand her patience before granting her the respect she had already earned. Her therapist reminded her, "You don't have to carry the whole industry. You carried yourself. That's enough." But Danielle wasn't sure. Was it ever enough? One night she returned to the terminal where it had all happened. The concourse was bustling, travelers hurrying, voices overlapping. She walked past the gate where Flight 417 had once stood. No plaque, no marker, no sign of the storm that had changed everything. Just another gate, another flight. She paused, watching strangers board without hesitation, without knowing what had once unfolded here. The silence felt fitting. Her story wasn't carved into marble or glass. It was carved into memory, into policy, into the visible web that governed respect. And yet, as she turned to leave, a young flight attendant caught her eye. The woman hesitated, then stepped forward, cheeks flushed. "Ms. Rivers, I wanted to say thank you. Because of you, our training changed. Because of you, I know better. Danielle nodded once, her calm smile returning. Then it was worth it. Months later, Danielle boarded another flight. Different airline, different city, but the ritual was the same. Ticket scanned, bag stored, seat claimed. This time, no attendant questioned her. No passenger smirked. She slid into her seat with quiet certainty, as though the skies themselves had remembered her name. She ordered water, not champagne. She preferred clarity. As the engines roared, she glanced out the window, watching the runway lights blur into streaks of gold. The aircraft lifted, climbing through clouds that glowed silver in the moonlight. For the first time in a long time, she felt still, not complacent, never that, but still. Her phone buzzed softly. A message from her niece. Auntie, my teacher showed your video in class. We're learning about courage. I told everyone you're my hero. Danielle smiled, her chest tightening in a way power never achieved. Contracts and clauses mattered, but this ripple through the next generation was priceless. She typed back, remember, respect is the runway. Always walk it. Closing her eyes, Danielle allowed herself to breathe. For years, she had fought battles in boardrooms, airports, negotiations. Each one left its scar. Each one carved resilience deeper into her bones. But this last storm, as humiliating as it began, had shifted something fundamental. She no longer carried the burden of proving herself. She had proven enough. She thought of the woman who had stolen her seat, of the captain who had dismissed her. She felt no anger now, only pity. They had seen her as small, and in doing so, they revealed their own weakness. The plane leveled off, cruising steady. The cabin lights dimmed, passengers settling into quiet routines. Danielle leaned back, exhaling. She wasn't naive. There would be more battles. The world did not change overnight, but she had carved a path, and paths have a way of widening when others follow. As the stars glittered outside her window, Danielle whispered softly to herself, words no one else could hear, not just survival, legacy.